Sexual harassment. This is a term that sparks a lot of very passionate reactions. Let's see if we can define exactly what it is. I want to talk a little bit about it. I like to refer to the data, so let's see what it says. Sexual harassment is any form of unwanted verbal, non-verbal, or physical conduct of a sexual nature with the purpose of or the effect of violating the dignity of a person, in particular when creating an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive environment. Lots of things to unpack there. But what stood out to me more than anything is unwanted. That stood out to me. Also with the effect of violating the dignity of a person. That's another part of it that stood out to me. So let's talk about sexual harassment. Welcome to Big People Business. I am author, activist, Jamaican, Shelly-Ann, and we're talking about sexual harassment. Now, in my earlier definition, I picked out the unwanted part of the definition, also the part where it violates a person's dignity. Now, if we're going to define sexual harassment in a simplified form, we're basically talking about the unsolicited, unwanted invasion of a person's space, or personal space. Sometimes it can be verbal, sometimes it can be tactile, that means you can actually touch them, and it depends also on the relationship that one has with another person, because there's a level of intimidation that can come with sexual harassment, and we're going to explore a little bit of that in this episode. Now, Jamaica recently passed a Sexual Harassment in the Workplace Act. I suggest you Google it and take a close look at it. But I don't want to get into that right now. I just kind of want to get a clearer understanding of what sexual harassment is, because I hear people make all sorts of silly comments when it comes to sexual harassment. People, I mean men. I hear a lot of men say things like, boy, you can't even look at a woman anymore because everything you do is sexual harassment. Boy, if you call to a woman, she has to say it's sexual harassment. If you even just touch her upon her answer, she has to say it's sexual harassment. And I see how she deal with certain other man, but when me do it, is a problem. And all of that is true. So let's break it down. Now, when you're looking at sexual harassment, a lot of people think sex, because they hear the sex in the word sexual. And they think sex, and when they think about sex, they think of nudity, and they think of, people bumping body parts. And while that is a part of sex, sexual harassment doesn't have to involve any of that. Sexual harassment doesn't require you to be unclothed, or to even touch people in particular areas that we consider sexual body parts, sexual parts of our anatomy. Sexual harassment really speaks to the lack of consent, very important, speaks to the lack of consent, and it also speaks to the violation of a person. Now, when we talk about consent, a lot of persons get up in arms because there are a lot of misunderstandings around consent. So let me see if I can clear up a few things. The first thing is, consent is never perpetual. That means you don't get consent forever and ever because somebody approved just now. You need consent every time. So if you got consent today, the next time you want to do that thing, you need consent again. And so on and so forth. So when we talk about consent, it's not a driver's license where you get consent to drive for 5 years. And even with driver's license, when the license expires, you no longer have consent to drive. So you have to renew your driver's license. So even that has a time limit on it. But generally speaking, consent is never perpetual. So you need to just keep that in mind, because you have a lot of persons who think that once you get access, it means you always have access. And that is not the case. I cannot forget a conversation around when Parliament was debating, revising the marital rape situation in this country, which don't get me started. That's still not started out yet. But I remember a pastor, I really cannot remember her name right now, but this stood out to me because I thought it was really crazy. She, in her defense, that husbands cannot rape their wives, said something to the effect of, I'm not quoting verbatim, to the effect of, when a woman marries a man, she gives him perpetual consent to her body. And I remember driving when I heard the foolishness and I nearly crashed the car. I was so livid. I'm like, why is she allowing her mouth to say something so irresponsible? There's no such thing as perpetual consent. Perpetual consent doesn't apply in any context. And so the idea that she's even introducing that idea, especially when it came to the particular subject of marital rape, was ludicrous. Because understand this, there are a lot of spouses in situations right now where their partners are raping them, violating them, and they get to do it because our laws, the laws in this country, does not see that as a violation. And it is not something that can be prosecuted right now, which needs to change. Anyway, focus. We're not talking about marital rape. So consent is something that is required every time you need access. That's the first thing. The second thing about consent is that what goes for you don't go for other people, or vice versa. Let me explain. I hear men say something like, them don't understand why this woman have such a problem because she make this a man and this a man and this a man and do things to her. But when me try to do it, she have a problem. Yeah, that's allowed. She don't want you to do it. She gave consent to everybody but you. That's allowed. That's how consent works. It doesn't apply to everybody. Everybody not going to get access. I mean, if you think about it in the case of a party, when you buy a ticket to go to a party, you might buy a ticket that takes you to certain levels of the party. The people with VIP ticket get to go in VIP. The people who never buy a VIP ticket don't have consent to go to VIP. It don't mean say the whole party must shut down because only certain people can go VIP. It means that if you like access to VIP, then you need to do what you need to do so you can get access. Similarly, when it comes to a person, they give access to who they like to give access to, and some people will not get access. That's just what it is. And if you're one of those persons who don't get access, that's okay. You just don't have access. End of discussion. So consent is not something that applies to everybody. It applies to whomever the person giving consent deems gets to have consent. Now, you might not agree with their process, and that's okay. You still can't tell them who they like to give consent to. That's just how it works. All right? Another thing about consent that I want people to understand is that there's a thing called time and place. Now, everything is not acceptable in every situation. So I don't know how much more explanation we need. So for example, you'll hear people say things like, you shouldn't date at work. People know that people don't follow that because wherever people are, them will date and they will have inappropriate relationships and sexual relationships and they will get closer, and it's what it is. That's why doctors marry doctors and lawyers marry lawyers and people working at the same office marry people working at the same office. It's just proximity. That is an inevitable thing that will happen, even though you have companies that have rules in their operational guides that you cannot date in the office. People find ways to do it. You have people right now who married and work at the same place. So the truth of the matter is that if you're in the same proximity, it is more likely that you will get personal, that you will have a relationship outside of your professional relationship, even if you're just friends. But time and place means that even if you are engaging in an intimate relationship outside of work, that's where it should stay. Inside of work, your intimacy should not be there because your intimacy does not fit in that place, and during work time is not the time to be intimate. So there's a question of time and place. So bear that in mind. We see so many situations, especially when the whole #Me Too movement was really in its highness. And you see a lot of stories, hear a lot of stories about people who were just full on inappropriate in the professional space. And we hear about stories. I think I hear about some Hollywood director who would masturbate in his office in front of people. Like the fact that he can get an erection in that situation, it seems like some special talent to me, but hey, I digress. I'm just saying the issue of time and place is very, very important because it is not just about you. In that time, in that space, you are now affecting the real reason why people are there. You're affecting why the group has gotten together, the productivity, the project, what the professional thing that you got together to do is being affected because right now you are bringing something in this space at a time where it is not relevant, appropriate, or even something that the rest of us are here to do. So that is something that we have to bear in mind when we think about consent and sexual harassment, a very, very big part of that. The time and place part of it is a very big part of the sexual harassment. Another thing, and this is probably one of the biggest things about consent that I really, really need to stress is your status can change. So for example, you might have gotten consent. You might have been the person that was allowed to do all the things. You might have been able to go all up in the place, have access to everything, eat everything where you want, do whatever you want to do, no worries. And then one day the person who owns the space and the place say, okay, that's enough. I don't want to hear anymore. You have to leave. Yeah, that's a thing. The status of the consent can change. You can gain consent and it can be removed. You could have had unlimited access. It can be removed. So consent is something that we really, really have to understand because as long as we're going to have interpersonal relationships, it is a major factor that plays in how we relate to each other. So don't forget that. And sometimes you just have to ask, can I do this? How do you feel about me trying that? Or can I still finish the sentence? Because it is a continuous, revolving, dynamic, ever-changing thing. And you cannot assume that just because you had it, you'll always have it. All right? So that's something about consent that I really wanted to make very, very clear. Now, as it relates to sexual harassment overall, I just find it very interesting how a lot of people are so oblivious. Oh, I don't even know what counts as sexual harassment. I don't understand why, back in the day, these things weren't offensive. They're offensive now. They have always been offensive. You know right from wrong. And let me tell you how you know. And I'm talking specifically to men here because most of the time women are aware of what it is because a lot of this unwelcomed, unwanted attention is usually coming our way. Not saying that men don't get unwanted, unwelcome attention too, but most of the times it's women who get it. So when I talk to men about consent and sexual harassment and all these kind of things, they like to tell me that, but I don't know what to do because some of these things were not offensive in the past. They were offensive. The difference is now we're talking about it. The difference is now that some things are just no longer acceptable. For example, I used to meet men in professional settings and it's not happening as much now, but it used to happen a lot more in the past. And, I'll be introduced to some man and somebody say, hi, Shelly, this is John. John meets Shelly. And, and John reaches out and shake my hand. And when John shake my hand, he use a finger here and scrape me in my hand. It's the most disgusting thing on the planet. I'm looking at John. I know that he's doing it. He knows that he's doing it. And he has a look on his face like, oh, I'm being so clever because the rest of the people don't know what I'm doing. And it is an indication that he wants to do something more than just shake my hand. I never try to imagine what else he wants to do, but I'll allow you to do that. The point I'm making is they know that this gesture is inappropriate. And because they do it the way they do it, they know that nobody else is seeing them do it. And they know it's inappropriate and they know what it implies, but they do it anyway and then feign ignorance when you say, stop it. It is inappropriate. I don't like it. It's corny as hell. You understand? So it's not a question of whether you know or not. Another thing that men used to do that they think is cute is they used to find ways to just touch you, put hands on bodies. I never said nothing I hate saying in my life. I don't get offended when you say words to me. Say whatever word you want to say to me. I'm not a part of this generation that gets so offended with words. I dare you to say a word to me to offend me. You cannot offend me. I mean, the worst possible thing you could call me matters not. Because for me to care what you say to me, I have to actually care about you. And most of the times I don't, because the people who I care about are not going to say offensive things to me. So generally, you can say whatever you want to say to me and I'm not offended at all. But when you touch me, oh, I don't want you to touch me. Do not touch me at all. I had an experience about 3 years ago that I thought was so, so awesome. And I talk about it a lot. And I was just going about my business. And this lady came up to me and she tapped me on my shoulder. And she says, tap me and I turn around. And she said, there is something at the back of your dress. I want to remove it from you, but I just want to remove it for you. But I just want to tell you in advance, is it okay if I remove it? And I paused for a second because I was like, wow. And I said, sure, go ahead. And she went and she moved it. But where the thing was placed, it was close to my bottom. And she moved the thing and, I said, thank you. We had a little exchange and she left. And I thought it was so appropriate the way she came up to me and asked me if she can remove the thing off my bottom at the back of my dress. I didn't see the thing. I was going about my business. But just imagine if I was just walking about my business and I feel somebody touching from my bottom. Some just random touch from my bottom. I go turn around like, hello? What you doing? So the fact that she came up to me and she asked first and then did it, I felt so appreciative of that because that's what we should do. We can't just welcome ourselves to people's bodies. I can't forget how many times my pregnant friends will say to me, I cannot understand how people just feel like they can just come up to you and put them hand on your belly. I've seen like people just come, random strangers. Lord, how kind of baby I have? Oh God, and I'll rub is her body. On hand, the lady body. And it's not done in any sort of malicious case, but this idea that we feel that we have access to touch people's body when we feel like, without even asking them, is absolutely crazy. And we need to just make adjustments where that is concerned because it simply cannot work, not in the society that we live in. One final point I want to make about sexual harassment is if you feel uncomfortable if somebody else sees or hears your exchange with this other person, it's probably not something for you to do, especially in a professional setting. I think that's a good rule of thumb. If at the end of the day, what you did was shown on a video and you'll feel a little about it, it's probably not the appropriate thing to do. So you can use that as a little guideline. So for all the people who don't have any clue what sexual harassment looks like and what are the things that you can do or not do in life because this whole sexual harassment thing is so complicated, use that as a guide. If you can't admit to it to a crowd and if they watch it on video, you're going to feel a little way, don't do it. Let's start with that as a guideline. In the meantime, as we continue to relate to each other, it's okay to ask permission. It's okay to accept if the person says no. And remember also, what you don't want for yourself, don't do to other people. Because that's another thing. You have some people who have all sorts of rules about what other people should give them permission to do. And if you ask them if they would feel comfortable with it, they won't. So just remember that, all right? And that's going to be it for me right here on Big People Business. Until I see you next time, remember, I am Shelly-Ann, author, activist, and Jamaican to the bone. Take care.